As Melinda said, my name is Damien Augustinus. I'm Managing Director of Origination at Plenary here in Melbourne. And thank you for CEDA for putting on the lunch, and it's great to see everyone in person. Certainly the biggest turnout in Melbourne I've seen since coming back to the office. And also welcome to those of you that are still joining us on live stream, but hopefully you'll get to visit one of these soon. I, like Melinda, would also like to acknowledge we meet today on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Plenary is an independent developer and a long-term investor in infrastructure. We pride ourselves on the way we partner with governments and institutions to deliver infrastructure and services which serve our communities for decades. Plenary is a homegrown Melbourne company. We started here in 2004 delivering Victorian Government public-private partnership projects such as Casey Hospital, the Melbourne Convention and Exhibition Centre, and over our time here we've had the opportunity to develop such life-changing facilities such as the Victorian Comprehensive Cancer Centre, a project of which we, and I know the Premier is certainly very proud through his involvement in that over time. Since that time, we've exported our unique approach across Australia, Canada, the US, Singapore, and now London, delivering and managing 74 infrastructure assets worth more than $45 billion. Back here in Victoria, we're currently working with the government to help deliver 65 new high-capacity trains for the Metro network, the first new train design in Melbourne for almost 20 years, constructing the largest single investment in healthcare in Victoria, the $1.5 billion new Footscray Hospital, and we recently opened the new Western Roads upgrade, freeing up traffic in Melbourne's previously congested west. We believe that good infrastructure decisions combine government policy initiatives and private sector expertise and innovation. We look forward to hearing more from the Andrews government on the infrastructure roadmap out of COVID and what role private capital can play in delivering its agenda. Our keynote speaker, of course, has been central to the government's approach. Daniel Andrews is the 48th Premier of Victoria. He was first elected to Parliament in 2002 as the member for Mulgrave. In 2007, he was appointed Minister for Health, where he was instrumental in procuring the state's first comprehensive cancer centre, one of the top 10 facilities of its type in the world. After missing this event last year, it's great to have the Premier return to deliver his State of the State address. So please join me in welcoming the Premier of Victoria, the Honourable Daniel Andrews.
I could have done the opening remarks for Plenary with a workbook like that. That's fantastic. Thank you, Damien. That's very kind of you to say all of those things and for all the work that you and your team do. Thank you so much. Can I begin my remarks today by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay my deep personal respects to elders past and present. And I do that proud to know that Victoria has taken the most profound, the most meaningful steps towards truth, justice and treaty of any jurisdiction in our country. That's something that every Victorian should be very, very proud of. To Melinda Salento and CEDA trustees and members, thanks again for the kind invitation to be back here. I've appeared many times, but it's so good to be here with such a large crowd. I give lots of speeches, but I haven't given one to a crowd this big in person for quite some time. I'm sure there's some sort of mute joke there or something. There'll be all sorts of different jokes we could be doing, but it is great to be back in the room, no masks, very few rules indeed. We've been through so much together, but it's great to be back here, and we've always appreciated the dialogue and the debate, the discussion, the contest of ideas that is synonymous with CEDA. It's a fantastic institution and one that I'm always grateful to. It's helped us to be a better government and helped me to be a better leader through these discussions over a long period of time. So thank you for the kind invitation to be here. To sponsors, to ministerial and parliamentary colleagues, and I'm very, very pleased, and I'll come to this topic of energy quite soon, but I'm very pleased to be joined here by Minister for Energy, Environment and Climate Change and Solar Homes, Lily D'Ambrosio. Now, there has been quite a bit happen since I was last here, but I want to take you back to the last time I was on this stage delivering a State of the State speech. That was back in December 2019, just before the start of a terrible bushfire season, one of the worst that we've seen, certainly by landmass burnt, certainly by the very real challenges, dislocation, the damage, the absolute devastation, not just in Victoria but across New South Wales as well, and indeed no part of the country was not touched by that bushfire season. There wasn't a single case of COVID recorded anywhere in the world, and we could never have imagined what the next 2 years would hold for each of us. At the time, Victoria's economy was sound, indeed more than sound. In the 5 years to 2018-19, business investment and employment all grew faster in Victoria than in any other state or territory. That is not just about government leadership, it's about the contributions that so many in this room, everybody in this room, makes to the underlying strength, the fundamental strength of the Victorian economy and therefore the Victorian community. Prior to the pandemic, we had operating budget surpluses each and every year since coming to office in 2014, and many other metrics, jobs growth, investment, confidence, credit, the views of credit rating agencies. All of those fundamentals were very, very, very strong, in fact stronger than anywhere else in our nation. But as COVID hit our shores and cases quickly ramped up, we learned about the economic realities of this 1 in 100 year global pandemic event. By mid-2020, markets of course had taken a big hit globally. Australia entered its first recession in 30 years, and nearly 200,000 Victorians lost their jobs in just 2 months. But since that low point, those low points, we've seen the economy bounce back and a real shift in our jobs figures. Points of pride, points of confidence as we look to the medium and indeed to the long term. That, ladies and gentlemen, is no accident. Throughout the pandemic, we've focused on getting Victorians back into work. That's been a key focus, just as keeping Victorians safe and protecting our health service and getting through these unprecedented times. All of those things have been guiding motivators. But jobs have always been important to us, always, in everything that we've done. And so getting people back to work has really driven us. $619 million have been invested in Jobs Victoria to help achieve exactly that outcome. That's a program that's delivered tailored and targeted support for Victorians looking for a job, including, just by way of example, $150 million in wage subsidies specifically designed to support women back into the workforce. This pandemic has shown some of our greatest strengths, but it has also uncovered some inherent weaknesses in communities, but most especially in the way that our economy and particularly our labour market works. That program, as one example, is us responding to those challenges as only a government with urgency and bold ambition can do. Working alongside as well, businesses facing worker shortages, that's been a priority also. Skill shortages are very real, and not just because of COVID. Many of those shortages were there well before the pandemic event. But we've invested $34 million, again by way of example, to provide subsidies of up to $20,000 to help businesses in areas where there are critical workforce shortages to hire more Victorians. Taking a slightly broader view and aggregating all of this effort and so much more, today our unemployment rate's just 4.1%. That's the lowest since records began being collected in 1978. Some speak about full employment. I never use those terms. We've got a very high participation rate, a low unemployment rate, but it can be lower still because every job is critically important, and some of the things I'll talk about in a moment are all about driving that number down even further, or seeing more people actively looking for work, seeing more people confident and supported and empowered to be out part of our productivity mission, part of the economic future and part of them reaching the potential that belongs to them, participating as fully as possible. That should unite all of us. But it doesn't just unite us, it drives and dominates the work of our government. It's not just in Melbourne though. We see 3.1% unemployment in regional Victoria. That is, as someone who comes from regional Victoria and someone who knows just how important regional Victoria is to the success of our entire state, that's a point of pride as well. We are seeing those numbers translate into spending as well. This summer, consumer spending was back to almost pre-pandemic levels, and the December quarter alone, our economy grew by some 3.9%. Over the year 2021, it grew faster than any other jurisdiction in our nation, and fully 50% faster than the national economy. Ladies and gentlemen, the state of our state is strong because the people of our state are strong. We have been through so much as a community, but through unity, by sticking together, through untold acts of kindness and courage, we have been able to achieve something that is unique. We are one of the most vaccinated jurisdictions anywhere in the world. We have stuck together, and that's why we can, with optimism and confidence, look to the future. But that future was never going to be easy, pandemic or no pandemic. There are big challenges. There are things that we have to adapt to. There are things that we have to turn into the opportunities they can be through hard work and that uniquely Victorian innovation, critical thinking. That's what we do best. I want to talk a little bit about some of those areas and just how important I believe they are. I believe that the states are going to have been and are going to continue to drive the economic success of this nation. I believe that the biggest drivers of growth over the next 10 years will be states and territories. Infrastructure, skills and training, health and wellbeing, energy. These are the things that will move the needle on productivity and propel our economy, our national economy, forward. When we think of major economic reforms, and I've spoken to CEDA audiences about this before, we of course think about things that shaped Australia, a modern Australia. Most of us, of course, would point to key measures like removing import protections and opening up our economy to the world. Floating the dollar, deregulating our banking system, compulsory super, the list goes on and on. They're all transformational reforms. They're all delivered by Labor governments, and they are all 30 years old. The problem at the moment is that there is no national reform agenda coming out of the national government. That is very real. It's disappointing, but you cannot have a debate and a discussion about the future without acknowledging that point. Beyond that, I'm not just highlighting problems, I'm also going to try today to talk about ways in which we as states have the greatest influence over dealing with that challenge and the challenges of our time. The levers that drive economies, that build infrastructure, that improve lives and create momentum are now, in my judgment, all pulled by state and territory governments. When it comes to wholesale reform, it is the states that are leading the way. In Victoria, we're doing it in mental health, in skills and training and TAFE, in energy and in infrastructure. But let me start, if I could, with education and early childhood development. And I'll race through these examples as quickly as I can so I can leave as much time for questions at the end. Australia is one of very few OECD countries not offering 2 years of preschool for our smallest citizens. And studies show, so many studies show, that 2 years of preschool give kids the extra time to prepare and get ready for primary school. That's so important. What we know is if they start behind, they tend to stay behind. And that's why we're doing what no other state has done. We're delivering 2 years of kinder to every single Victorian child. It's historic, it's a massive investment, it's critical, it's one of the biggest things that we can do to set our kids and to set our state up for success in the future. And for every $1 that we invest in early childhood education, we'll get at least $2 back over the life of that child in reduced social costs, in increased earnings and productivity. We announced this back in 2018, and less than 4 years later, every child in every community across our state is benefiting, starting with up to 5 hours of subsidised kinder, ramping up to the full 15 hours in the years to come. Not only is it ensuring our kids get the best start in life, but it's also creating jobs, thousands and thousands of jobs. Over the course of the reform, More than 6,000 teacher and educator jobs around the state will be created. 5,000 construction jobs are created in building new classrooms and extra capacity to grow the system. Some 880 of those educator jobs have already been created. Our free TAFE certificates and diplomas in early childhood education and care are the backbone of delivering those new workers, creating opportunity in turn for thousands of Victorians while ensuring a great start in life for hundreds of thousands of Victorian kids. Early childhood reform changes the trajectory of learning for our kids, but it also is going to change and transform their ability to participate in our workforce when they grow up. Kids who do 2 years are less likely to leave school and more likely to go on to further study. It's real reform. It's meaningful. It's not just being talked about, it's being delivered. Secondly, for too long, governments around our nation have put issues of mental health in the too hard basket, refusing to acknowledge that the system is broken and refusing to build a new one. Instead, governments have committed to the status quo and periodic topping up of funding and boasting and bragging about how that will make things better. You won't fix a problem if you don't first acknowledge it. We did that, and we committed to and delivered Australia's first Royal Commission into mental health. 74 recommendations from the Royal Commission's final report are and will transform the system, changing lives and saving lives. For the first time, from the very first time you reach out for help, all the way through to those who need sustained support, we have to put every aspect of mental health care under the microscope, deliver those reforms, fix a broken system, and have a series of disparate services better connected to support people to be well, not just to catch but some of them when they are in crisis. We're doing that one recommendation at a time, one service, one step at a time. In our 2020 budget, we invested $869 million. At the time, the biggest single investment in mental health that our state had ever seen. In our last budget, we delivered 4 times that amount, some $3.8 billion over 10 years. That is the single biggest investment in mental health delivered by any government in our nation ever. It's also been described as the biggest social reform in our state's history, and I think it is certainly one of them. It is so powerful for dignity, for safety, for productivity. It is a winner. It repays you so many times over. We are building a new system. It means delivering more community-based services. It's about acute beds, yes, but it's also about early intervention. It's about a new dedicated system to support our kids. These are not costs. These are profound investments in a better, fairer, more productive, more profitable Victoria. This investment is underpinned as well, a bit like early childhood education, by recruiting thousands of additional staff, some 3,000, at least 3,000 as an initial boost to our mental health workforce. We're ensuring that Victorians get the care they need. There is a long way to go though. There is a long way to go. But just for a moment, if I can, I think we all understand, because we're all members of families, we all know that 1 in 5 of us will experience mental illness during our lifetime, but 5 in 5 of us are touched by that. I just want to talk for a little bit, not so much about the human element of mental health, but about the economic dividend and benefit. This is lasting reform. The cost of mental illness represents to Victoria around $14 billion each and every year. That's the cost of a broken system, one that doesn't work. And $1.9 billion to the state's employers every year alone. If we reduce this by just 15%, if we saw improvement, but not even the ultimate goal, just a 15% improvement, then that is more than $1 billion in extra economic activity, in reduced costs, in productive capacity each and every year. At a national level, in 2020, the Productivity Commission's Mental Health Inquiry found that the cost of mental illness and suicide is between $40 and $70 billion a year. It's not about whether we can afford to fix it, it's whether we can afford not to. That's the key. We can't. We need to do more and we need to do better. And it's not just about speeches and criticism and politics. We come from a place where we are doing this. We are doing exactly what we said we would do, and it's my hope that others will join us in that work. We would be much stronger and much better if the Productivity Commission, a National Productivity Commission report, became national government policy. If you implemented the National Productivity Commission's report, if you made that agenda real, then that would deliver to the national economy some $21 billion in additional activity every single year. It's not acceptable to me to do anything else. This is such an important issue, and for every good reason. We need ambition. We need more, not a defence of the status quo. Our $3.8 billion commitment signals our commitment, our genuine commitment to not just talking about this, but to doing something about it. That is more than the federal government invests across the whole country. That gives you a perspective of the deficit in leadership and the deficit in ambition that I think is holding us all back. That's not one that's repeated at a state level. We are getting this done, and I think it's further evidence that those big levers for reform and growth and change are with the states and territories. Wednesday marked 1 year since the final report of the Royal Commission was handed down, and I can report to you that 85% of those 74 recommendations, we've already begun work on those. Some of them are indeed complete. 25 new local mental health and wellbeing hubs are now open. 144 public mental health beds, extra beds, their construction's well underway to give 2,500 more Victorians the support they need each and every year. And over 500 Victorians with lived experience who are on their own mental health journey have helped to frame those policy responses. Listening to consumers, that lived experience voice is so important. In any event, we're doing what we said we would do. This shouldn't be news to anyone. We promised this and we are delivering it. It is further proof, I think, that the big drivers of productive capacity and better outcomes for people are at a state and territory level. This is a shining example of that. But it's not the only one. I've spoken about early childhood education, I've spoken about mental health. Now let me talk about skills and training. We are building, of course, tunnels and removing level crossings and upgrading schools and hospitals. So many projects in every part of the state. Our free TAFE offering is critical to getting that job done. It's helping us to train thousands of Victorians and give them the opportunity to reach the potential that belongs to them, to be part of something bigger, to help us get the job done, yes, but to help provide for all the life opportunities that they are entitled to as well. Very quickly, when we came to government, TAFE had been smashed. Enrolments were at the lowest they'd been for a very long time, perhaps ever. Hundreds of millions of dollars had been cut. We had dodgy providers providing second-rate training. That's all changed. That's all changed and changed for the better. TAFE and VET enrolments are now the highest that they've been for a very long time. Over 270,000 students are enrolled in courses in 2021 alone. And there are 22% more apprentices in our workforce today than there were in 2017. And of course, free TAFE has saved students on fixed and limited incomes. They've shared in some $220 million in course fees that they didn't have to pay, costs that were completely avoided. Beyond that, our major project skills guarantee that sees 10% of workers on major projects either as apprentices, trainees or engineering cadets. That's making sure that our big build, that massive pipeline, the biggest ever seen in our nation and one of the biggest in our country's history, is leaving a legacy, not just the built form, not just the roads and bridges, the better public transport system, the better hospitals and schools, but the skills that are there, not just for that job, but because of that job, there for every project that comes thereafter. That, in some respects, is just as important a legacy. We have made this a priority, both to invest in skills and training, to make sure the system could survive the savage cutbacks that were made, but not just to repair damage that had been done by others, but to make it stronger and better than it's ever been. Free TAFE, strong TAFE, and also that skills guarantee turning our effort into an opportunity to create and embed skills has never been more important. Beyond that, though, it's not just about the government, it's about partnerships with industry as well, helping students to get the practical learning, the critical learning that will be so important for them and for all of us into the future. If I can give you a couple of examples. Our efforts mean that students are working with some of our biggest companies and sometimes in some of the most specialised fields so that they can do such important work in the future. For instance, biomanufacturing students at Gippsland TAFE, they go and do their practical on-the-job experience at one of our state's most advanced paper manufacturers. Light vehicle mechanics who are students at Kangan Institute, they go and access mentoring and accelerated training at BMW and Toyota. TAFE students in Wodonga, because it's not just in Melbourne, it's right across the whole state, have the option of working alongside the Army Logistics Training Centre to gain the best skills and experience possible across a whole range of important disciplines. And of course, with certificates in hospitality, commercial cookery, baking and even meat processing, that's all part of Free TAFE now. That's dealing with some critical shortages that have been highlighted, particularly through the pandemic. Those industries have been very hard hit. They've got critical shortages. We're doing something practical and meaningful about that. Our Big Build apprenticeship program, alongside our construction industry partners, alongside this new and innovative model of engaging with industry, is delivering very significant results. It helps people to reach their potential, and every Victorian who reaches their potential helps us as a state to reach ours. This is reform, it's critical, it's not an optional extra. If we don't do a better job of investing in our people, then we will be held back. There's simply no question in my mind about that. So from cybersecurity to mental health nurses to kinder teachers and everything in between, we are driving the reform and the activity in this sector, and I think we're stronger for it. Next, of course, I couldn't give you a speech without talking about the infrastructure program. I'll try and be as brief as I can. It's a very big agenda, but we are a bit tight on time, so I won't go through the whole list. But whether it's Metro Tunnel, North East Link, removing level crossings, building hospitals, schools, road and rail projects across the whole state, it's underpinning confidence and demand. It's a very, very important part of our recovery. It was important before the pandemic. It's arguably even more important now. That's not an agenda of words, it's an agenda of action. And I'm sad to say, there are so many of those projects that don't have not $1 of federal government funding in them. There are some that do, and we've appropriately acknowledged those along the way. But the lion's share of this heavy lifting is being done by us as the Victorian government in partnership with Victorian and national companies and paid for by Victorian taxpayers. That's not a partnership, that's just a government with urgency, getting on and getting things done. What we saw, though, is that we couldn't just do business as usual, even before the pandemic. Particularly post-GFC, we had a number of contractors, a number of partners unwilling to be part of fixed-price PPPs. That was disappointing, given that Victoria was, of course, the home of that model. But it told us that not only did we have to do more, as we'd committed to do, but we needed to do it differently. And we needed to engage with industry to develop a new model of procurement. One that's much more about partnership and a collaborative approach to dealing with the risks and challenges of complex and really big projects. We've done that, and I'm very pleased to be able to say that we have arrangements that are growing the capacity of the industry, helping us to get projects delivered. They are unique, but they're grounded in common sense, which all good reform is grounded in common sense. Several of our major projects today, by way of example, are being delivered through a more collaborative procurement model with industry, sitting at the same table with contractors, designing solutions together, discussing problems together, agreeing on price and structure together. That mutual support of each other is fixing problems as they occur. That means that both government and industry are much more flexible throughout the project's design and delivery, and it means that we've got more conversations and less legal claims. That's always good for everybody involved. No offence to the lawyers in the room. Those partnerships can be stronger still, though. I just want to make mention of perhaps the best example of that more collaborative approach, and that's in relation to level crossing removals. These massive projects are being delivered by 4 ongoing project teams involved in an alliance model with multiple contractors. That's meant that there's far greater opportunities for Tier 2, 3 and 4 construction companies beyond the Tier 1s, but also means we're working with more contractors and giving them a better view of the future pipeline of works. That not only attracts them to our state, but it gives them the confidence to stay and to invest and to deal with all the flag falls of setting up here in Victoria or anywhere new. We're removing that lengthy tender process each and every stage along the way, and that means that we're getting better delivery through partnership and faster delivery through those alliance models. Back in 2014, many doubted that we would deliver the removal of 50 of these congested level crossings and deadly level crossings by the end of 22. We're not at the end of 22 yet, and we've already got rid of 58 of them. The 58th was removed just last week in Clyde Road, Berwick, just as we had committed to do. We're fully a year ahead of schedule as well on delivery of 85 of these being removed by 2025. It's a pipeline of work that's provided 65 million hours of work to Victorian workers. In January alone, we had some 5,670 workers on level crossing projects across the state. And back to that major project skills guarantee I spoke about before, that 10%, we've got hundreds, indeed thousands of staff over the journey that have done their training that they will carry with them to the next job and the one after because of and as part of the level crossing removal program. Put it another way, those apprentices, trainees and cadets have themselves worked 4.6 million hours over the last 7 years. It's a very big agenda, and one that we're proud of. It is leadership, it is reform, not just in size and scale, but how it's done as well. The partnership, the innovation, being creative, dealing with the challenges that such a big agenda poses itself, and of course the fact that the global market is very different today than what it was a decade ago or 2 or 3 decades ago. Now finally, I want to talk about energy. Can't have a discussion about reform, can't have a discussion about turning challenges into opportunities, and you certainly can't have a discussion about the primacy, the absolute policy and delivery primacy of the states and territories without talking about energy. Australia lags the developed world when it comes to renewable energy generation. We are a first world country with second-rate renewable energy ambitions. Around 60% of our national energy mix is still fossil fuels. National emissions targets are eclipsed. They're embarrassingly eclipsed by those set by states and territories. And what's clear is that the transition to cheap renewable energy will only get done if it's led by states and territories. When we came to government, Victoria's natural ability to generate cheap and efficient wind and solar power was essentially untapped. Our state was in the dark when it came to renewable power generation, and ultimately that meant bigger bills for Victorian households and businesses and an unstable network that wasn't always up to the job. So we developed streamlined planning. We ran the country's biggest ever reverse auction. We legislated ambitious targets, and 7 years on, we are turning this around. We also invested $1.3 billion into our solar homes program that meant more Victorians could afford to generate power on their own roofs. Today, Victoria has the lowest power prices in 5 years and the greatest annual increase in renewable energy of any state ever. On average, our solar homes, as one example, program saves 178,000 households around $1,000 each and every year and supports more than 5,500 jobs. Again, part of free TAFE training and that skills agenda I've talked about also. 32% of our state's power is now renewable, and rooftop solar is contributing a massive 1 gigawatt of power to the grid every year. That's rooftop solar alone. Fundamentally, our energy reforms are about creating jobs, ensuring the integrity of the grid, and saving families and households so much money when it comes to annual bills. But of course, we can't stop there. Back in November, I announced that we'd be investing some $38 million to support the growth of our offshore wind energy capacity. The funding would support 3 new major wind projects off the Gippsland and Bass coasts in Commonwealth waters. They'll be delivered by Star of the South, Macquarie Group and Flotation Energy. The combined energy generation across just these three projects alone would be enough to power some 3.6 million homes, 4.4 gigawatts in total. That's more than all the households in Victoria and South Australia combined. The project will create some 5,500 jobs and bring more than $18 billion in additional investment to our state. It is the single largest offshore wind announcement to that point. It showed that we meant business. It showed that we were and are fully committed to a renewable energy future. Today I want to go a bit further. Today I can announce that we are establishing a new and even more ambitious renewable energy goal for our state's future. For the first time anywhere in Australia, we will set a minimum target for offshore wind power generation. By 2032, Victoria will reach a massive 2 gigawatts of offshore energy production. That's the equivalent of 20% of Victoria's energy needs today. Setting a target of 4 gigawatts by 2035 and finally 9 gigawatts by 2040. Targets that, ladies and gentlemen, we will meet and that we will exceed. It is the clearest and best signal we can send to investors, to those who will build and operate and those who want to fund and invest in this technology, in this resource. It's more than a signal though. It's a message from a government with a proven track record of getting things done. And a government not prepared to simply say, well, that's a matter for the feds, when we know they'll do precious little about it. We have a very different culture, a very different outlook. And this, I think, will be very good news for those who are interested in not just talking about transition or denying there's a need to make one, but it'll be good news and more for those who are prepared to make that transition with us. The Clean Energy Council estimates that over 30% of all Australian renewable jobs are right here in Victoria. And with the investments and targets that we're setting, we're turning those estimates into more than that, to absolute certainties. The new offshore wind goal that I've announced today will create thousands more jobs on top of the 24,000 jobs created through the 2030 renewable energy target. And that's in addition to the $5.8 billion in economic activity these investments will generate themselves. Now, Lily is here today. No one is across the detail of their portfolio better than Lily. She knows and understands this sector and what's needed, what's important. But she's got ambition. She's got big plans. And I thank her for her work always pushing me to do more and do better in this space. It's so, so important. And if we wait for others to do what they ought to do, well, then nothing will get done. Again, the primacy of states and territories when it comes to reform, productivity, profitability, a better standard of living, a more secure future, a better nation. It's up to us to get that job done, and we are doing it. Today I've set out those examples, reforms that I think are fundamental, state shaping and improving the lives not just of Victorians, but I could have done many other examples from other jurisdictions where those state and territory governments are equally committed to getting the job done. Our government is ambitious enough to build big and to achieve things that other governments have not achieved. And if the pandemic has given us anything, it's the opportunity to build a fairer Victoria. It's also a clear demonstration that we are not a government that accepts the status quo. That's not why we're supported by the Victorian community, and it's not what we offer. And it certainly won't be what we offer at the end of this year. I know this to be a central truth. If you don't have a reform agenda, then you don't have an agenda at all. Our future as Victorians and indeed Australians is all about turning challenges into opportunities, enhancing our strengths by adapting and changing as well, all with a sense of urgency and the certain knowledge that every day in government is a precious gift where you are not only able but indeed obliged to get things done. The state of our state is strong because Victorians are strong. This is the centre of critical thought, inquiry, engagement, research, infrastructure, the centre of energy and momentum in our nation. This is the centre of our nation. We've got a long way to go. There's much to repair. We'll get that job done because we know just how important it is to lead. Our state is always at its best when we're out in front showing others how it should be done. That little parochial note, I'm sure you will forgive me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Premier, for that sort of lucid, clear and great vision and agenda for the state. My name's Anthony Miller. I'm the Chief Executive of Westpac Institutional Bank, and it's my pleasure to facilitate this discussion with the Premier. There's a lot of detail in that presentation, so I'll give you a moment to digest it. If you would like to ask a question, we have people moving around the room who will provide you with a microphone. If you do want to ask a question, please state your name, the organisation you're from, and jump straight into the question, please, rather than provide us with a monologue. While we wait to get a little bit more organised, we've also got a system where you can log on and provide your questions, and I'll try to switch between the floor and those questions as quickly as we can. So thank you, Premier. That was incredibly interesting and incredibly detailed. One thing that we heard a lot of in that presentation was collaboration, coordination, and it's been a remarkable couple of years. What's your thoughts around the National Cabinet, the opportunity to coordinate and collaborate going forward, given how critical it is to achieve the agenda, not just for this state, but for the nation? Is that working?
I think it is, yes. Growing up, I was always taught that when you speak, you should say something. So I've made a few comments in my prepared remarks today about some of the things that I think are disappointing about the federal government. And I make no apology for being as frank as I can be, in a sense of trying to be constructive. I've had all those conversations and made all those points to the Prime Minister privately. One thing I won't criticise the Prime Minister or the federal government for is the formation of the National Cabinet. I think it has worked well. It's a cabinet, so therefore it's not perfect. It's made up of people with different views and different outlooks, different lived experience, different imperatives. But I think it has served us well as a vehicle to deliver unity and to deliver that common purpose, and as best as we could, set a kind of common approach. The greatest strength, though, of the National Cabinet is that from the very first meeting there was an acknowledgement that every state's different, that the virus would present differently in every part of the country, and that the best response would not be a uniform response, but instead a response that was much more tailored to the individual circumstances from an epidemiological point of view, as well as lots of other local factors. And I was asked yesterday, isn't it great that WA's opened up? Well, yeah, it is. But I've never been critical for the fact that they were closed off. They had an opportunity to do something that we just couldn't do. They're far enough away, they're structured in such a way that they could keep it out. And as difficult as that has been for those who might want to travel there and couldn't, some, particularly commentators, have become fixated on this issue, that we've got to be one country and one nation. Of course, yes, we do. But I think the people of WA are pretty happy that their Premier kept them safe and that they didn't have to go into the borrowings that we've had to do because they're a different state, they're a different place. They had options that we just didn't have. So everyone's done their own thing, but as part of a consistent national plan and a consistent framework, and I think the National Cabinet has worked very well, and I hope that it continues. It's certainly, as the longest serving First Minister around that table, I can tell you it's a lot better than COAG used to be, and let's hope that trend continues.
One question just follows a little further on from that theme. What's your thoughts around federation reform? Do you think there's the opportunity now, or do you think that's not available just given what we have on our plate, so to speak?
Well, I think if you are prepared to be outcome focused, so we have this kind of, it's almost cyclical. You can set your watch by it almost. Every 5 years or so we have a national tax reform debate, and it goes pretty well nowhere because there's too many losers, not enough winners. It takes a degree of, not just courage, but it takes a degree of focus that we perhaps can't summon. It also means that everything else falls away. Like, it does become the main game in town for a period of time, and it's important, but it's not necessarily the most important thing. I think the areas that we've talked about today would all be enhanced. Energy, early childhood, infrastructure, skills and training, and they're just examples. I could have talked about 50 other areas. They'd all be enhanced if we didn't have to pretend every day to be the state government and the national government, because that's really hard. It's really difficult. We don't have the resources of the federal government. We don't have the bounce back in receipts that they get. You know, income and their tax base is so much more responsive. We've got a time lag. It's transaction based. We've got to work harder for every dollar that we finish up having at our disposal. We could, again, we don't have to do political speak or management speak. Like, I reckon everyone in this room knows you get more done when you work together. That's just a fact. So I'm very keen for a national government that's got some policy ambition and who knows that if you haven't got a reform agenda, then you ain't got an agenda at all. That's what I want. And I won't be partisan. People of Australia will make up their minds in the coming weeks about who that government should be. But whoever it is, I won't stop making the case, not just in words, but our experience, what we have done and delivered and what we are doing. It shouldn't be the case that all the big levers are at the cabinet table of the states and territories. That should not be the case. That should be a partnership. It should absolutely be a partnership. And resting on your laurels, having done a whole lot of really big, globally significant micro and macroeconomic reform, you know, in the 80s, that's not a plan for the future. It just isn't.
Is there any questions from the audience? Just see table over there to the right. While we're waiting for the microphone, you've achieved a lot. You've set a fantastic and clear agenda for the future. At a sort of more personal level, what are you most proud of over the last period of government from your perspective in terms of lots of noise, lots of headlines, lots of events, lots of challenges, but what are you most proud of in terms of what you've achieved?
Well, the only voices that matter are the voices of the Victorian community. I get on and do the things that Victorians voted for. It's a great honour to be the Premier of this state, a great honour. In fact, the honour of my life. But no one ever said it'd be easy. And the last couple of years have been tough for all of us. And, you know, when you need to step up and you need to not be distracted by those loudest voices and those who are experts on everything but don't necessarily know very much about much, then you just have to push forward. That's what leadership is about. This is not a popularity contest. It's a pandemic. And I think Victorians have done an amazing job. They've done an amazing job. I can't tell you the number of people that have come up to me and talked to me about how grateful they are that science led our approach, that health advice led our choices and decisions. They're not easy, not always popular. But if you try and be universally popular or, you know, play to the frustrations, perfectly legitimate frustrations, but if that's all that you're worried about, stoking and playing to the frustrations of people in a crisis, I don't think that's the sort of leadership that the Victorian community needs or wants, and it's not what I offer. So if you ask me what's the highlight of the last 2 years, 2 really tough, difficult years, the thousands and thousands of Victorians that I've spoken to and met with who have told me so many stories about courage and kindness, helping people they've never met, staying together, staying united. When we work together as Victorians, we can achieve anything. And we've done, as a state, we've achieved so much. And every single Victorian who's got vaccinated, every single Victorian who's worked in our health system, every single Victorian who's isolated waiting for a test result, every single Victorian who's gone and visited a neighbour, and the list goes on, they should be proud, and I'm certainly very proud of them.
Just over to the right.
Thank you, Theo Zagrafos, ANZ. Premier, during the height of the pandemic, we had our 5-kilometre diameter that we had to stick to. I'm just interested in your view around the Melbourne CBD and our local suburban shopping precincts and business precincts, and obviously there's a big effort now to get people back here into the Melbourne CBD, but where do you see maybe the future in regards to people going to their local shopping district as opposed to, say, coming here, or is there a plan that your government has to do both over the long term? Thank you.
Well, it's very pleasing earlier on to be able to quote some figures about spending being up, about unemployment being down, about a sense of confidence. You've only got to, if you don't believe those numbers, or me, go for a walk after lunch. The city looks different this week than it did last week, and it'll look different again next week. However, I think there are some changes that are going to be quite permanent. If not, they'll certainly linger for a while. I think the days of having 100% of people at their desk 100% of the time in the CBD and in CBDs in the suburbs or regional cities, I don't know about that. I think that working from home works very well for some people some of the time, and I think that that will stay a feature. We estimate we're going to finish up with about 60% back. As I talk to big employers, particularly in the CBD, they're probably more like the 50% mark. We'll just have to wait and see how that goes. Whether it's in the CBD or whether it's in Oakley or whether it's in the west of Melbourne or Bendigo or Ballarat or Geelong, like all that activity matters to me. It's all very, very important. However, there's been a lot of loud voices and a lot of, criticism, and that's fair enough. People are hurting and change is really tough, but I don't think we're going to go back to the way it was. I think some people, for some time each week, are going to spend that time working at home. And we need to embrace that and turn that into an important opportunity. Like, I'd welcome a discussion. I would welcome a discussion about commercial real estate in the city and about the fact that that's going to change. Now, some businesses are not going to need the floor space that they used to need. If you want to keep the CBD vibrant, then maybe we need to have more people living in the CBD. Now, I know conversions are difficult because floor plates are not designed for that, draft and all, ceiling heights and all those things, but all that we can work through those things. We can talk about those things. I suppose what I'm saying to you is some of this will be lasting, but we have to use that as an opportunity. And I think sitting down and talking and being as collaborative as possible is how we will turn those challenges into some opportunities for the future. But I'm buoyed and I'm confident and I'm very upbeat about masks off. People are back in the office. We're all here today at this event. This would be unthinkable a year ago, certainly 2 years ago. So things are changing for the better, but there's going to be some lasting impacts here, and that's not necessarily a bad thing if we're smart about it and if we listen to each other and work in a partnership to try and make that find the real positives in that.
Thank you. Another question just here in the front.
Good afternoon. My name's Gabrielle. I'm from an organisation called 1 in 5. We're a mental health charity. My question is, firstly, well done on the Royal Commission and implementing or starting to implement all the recommendations. But for most people, you're probably not aware that that was a look back of what has been and a redress of all the issues. Moving forward, one of the biggest opportunities we have is research. One of the most underfunded areas in science in Australia, in the world, is mental health or mental illness research for the most complex concerns. What is your plan as a government, if any, to take the leadership in that voice? The lack of money is extraordinary and needs to change.
If you think about the three great centres of science on our planet, they are London going out to Oxford, Boston and Melbourne. And anybody who works in the sciences, particularly life sciences, will confirm that for you. We didn't just do a really big and significant deal with Moderna, with one of the greatest patent libraries in the world, to come here and set up a limited number of, one of their very limited number of centres of excellence, which is kind of plenary in its outlook. Who knows where that will finish up? And so much about drug discovery and therapeutics and implantables and devices and all sorts of science, you don't quite know where you're going to finish up. But you know it's all worthy. We didn't do that deal because they had a dim view of our talents. Melbourne and Victoria is a real centre of scientific inquiry, great science. Not so good at the translation, not to be critical, but there's a gap there and we need to do something about that. That's why we created Breakthrough Victoria this year, $2 billion over 10 years. I'm indebted to John Brumby, who's a great friend of this sector. There's just not a Parkville precinct as we know it without John's leadership and his personal commitment to this, so he was the perfect choice to be the chair. That's the biggest in the country. It's one of the biggest funds of its kind in the world and has international attention. Specifically to mental health, there's a centre of excellence was one of the recommendations coming out of the Royal Commission. So that's about learning from clinical practice, scientific research, basic research, all the way through to translational research. So how do you make systems work better for clients, for carers? I'm more than happy to try and get you some further information about where we're up to on that. That'll be the only one of its kind. But the Royal Commissioners themselves, because people like you and so many others gave evidence about the critically important nature of continuous learning and improvement, this is well covered. Probably best if I'll get something to you. If you come and see me afterwards, I'll get something for you and give you a bit of other information. Now, I wouldn't want anyone to think that there was no mental health research before the Royal Commission. It's been a big field of inquiry for us. And MHRI, the work of people like David Kopolov and others, many others, Pat McGorry down at Origin. Again, we've got a big and proud story to tell when it comes to mental health research, but we're doing more, and the Royal Commission calls us to do more, and that's part of that $3.8 billion, all of which is about the future. And thank you for the charity work you do. It's very important.
Thank you. Look, apologies. We could go for a lot longer on just the Q&A discussion. Unfortunately, time constraints mean we'll have to pull it up here. I'll now invite Jeff Connolly from Siemens to give the vote of thanks. But Premier, congratulations and thank you again for that presentation and your vision and your agenda.
Thank you, Anthony, and thank you, Premier, for such an open and lively Q&A. Always a key part of the annual State of the State event. It's a privilege for all of us to be in the room and hear firsthand the Premier's reflections on the key issues facing the great state of Victoria. The CEDA stage is respected and sought after. CEDA is one of the few fiercely independent member-based platforms in the country, non-vested interest, non-media influenced. CEDA is a research-based organisation initiating, facilitating and participating in discourse on issues relevant to our economic and social circumstances and development. And your point about mental health having a profound impact on the economy is exactly the sweet spot and why CEDA has both those elements in its objectives. It's also a privilege, of course, for Siemens to lend our support to CEDA in its work. You might see from the banners there, Siemens has actually been in Australia 150 years this year. We are a technology-based company, industry, energy, healthcare, that strives to transform the everyday for our customers and society. We've been able to thrive by bringing new technologies applicable to current challenges over that period of time. And in many cases, and I refer often to Alan Finkel, I'm sure he's not in the room, but he wouldn't mind me saying, when he advocates for lower emissions, in many cases, technologies of today solve the problems of technologies of the past. And the way they do that is make those technologies of the past completely redundant. And that drives us forward into new worlds, particularly if I talked on the energy side. Premier, you touched on COVID, the profound shock of COVID and the uncertainties related to it. Whilst, of course, not yet completely over, it has delivered us with a newfound confidence in techniques to manage pandemics, not available to us 100 years ago, I more than imagine, and indeed force us to dig deeper into the challenges of the right decisions in light of the ethical frameworks that make us all Australians. The Group of Eight succinctly put the ethical framework at the beginning of the pandemic as maintaining democratic accountability, considering civil liberty, using measures appropriate to the problem, proportionate to the problem, ensuring measures are time-bound, ensuring equal access to healthcare, that there is a fair sharing of the cost of those measures, and overall, above all, making sure we take care of the disadvantaged first. Premier, no mean feat, I think. You had the responsibility for managing it, and we owe you a debt of gratitude for your dedication and tireless energy. Can I have a round of applause, please, for the Premier on that? As your address indicates, the focus is forward-looking. Several points resonated with me today, and I think what people forget quickly is the big picture. We went from bushfires to the loss of 200,000 jobs in the space of 2 months when we hit the pandemic. You made the point that we're one of the most vaccinated jurisdictions in the world and gives us a base for confidence going forward. You highlighted that the states have an accentuated role in the future to lead reform. Infrastructure, health, wellbeing, education pathway reform for relevant future-ready skills. From the Siemens perspective, having pioneered Industry 4.0 advanced apprenticeship programs with Swinburne University, that's right in the heart of what we talk about when we talk about the importance of apprenticeships, but the importance of apprenticeships that are future-ready. And of course, and I've mentioned it already, your point is well made on the need for transformation of the approach of mental health. There is no question that if we don't address that, then we suffer economically as well. Today, I had the honour of inviting Victoria's Chief Scientist, Dr. Amanda Capels, to join us. I invite her because she's doing some critical work, particularly in the area of pharmaceuticals, the mRNA vaccination, medication topic, that we need to have an advanced manufacturing capability in this state to be independent of what comes our way in the future. And I commend the work you're doing, and I thank you for the way you're doing it, Amanda. Our Siemens process automation is also one of the leading technologies. There's no surprise that we've engaged to find out what is world's best practice and what might be applied in the Australian context. We've also had deep partnerships with universities over a longer period of time, and they exactly on point to what the Premier is talking about. You need to reform education. You need to see education from cradle, pre-secondary, let me not use the word grave, pre-secondary, right the way through. How do you bring together those pathways in a way that we rethink the traditional forms of education leading into post-secondary? And the work that we're doing with Swinburne, I think, is groundbreaking. Finally, I'd like to thank and congratulate the Premier and the team on articulating the vision for accelerating Victoria's recovery. It is the role of all leaders to see the glass half full, driving looking ahead, but with the experiences of the past, whether they are good or less good. I would like again to acknowledge and thank our co-sponsors. These events wouldn't take place without the sponsors that are willing to stand on the CEDA stage, Westpac, Plenary Group and PwC. And finally, judging by the diversity and calibre of the people in this room, it's fair to say that we all value this independent forum that CEDA provides us. I'd like to call on Melinda now to close us out. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Premier. As evidenced by the questions and the fact that we're running a little bit late, we could have kept you here all day. There's a real thirst to hear about reform, and that's super exciting, I think, for all of us. One of the things that really resonated for me was your reference to the fact that reform has to be driven by common sense and working across sectors, and I guess that resonated because that's really what we try to do at CEDA. That was something that I found quite insightful, and I'm sure I'll take home to the team, so to speak. One more thing for me, Jeff's already kindly thanked the sponsors. I'll add my thanks to that again. I did just want to pause just for 1 second and actually thank my team. We set them the task at the end of 2021 to start this year off with a bang, recognising that, as evidenced by so many of you here in the room today, you wanted to be back at this kind of event, you wanted to be having these kinds of conversations. So we set them that task and they set about it, and then Omicron hit, and this is something they've been dealing with for a long time, like all of you. But I'm just so pleased that we've managed to hold this event. We've managed to get so many people in the room here, also for a number of events up in Sydney and in Adelaide. With WA borders opening, we'll be across there. But the team's done a fantastic job, and they've done it because our members and guests really appreciate it. So I just wanted to extend my thanks to them. They have built a tremendous pipeline of more of this great activity. If you're interested, please jump on the website, ceda.com.au, and the research team has also been pumping out some fantastic content, which is really important for the conversations that we're having this year. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for supporting us, and again, another round of applause from the Premier.